then that's a position. You can only split that thing in half. That's as close as you can get.
Right.
But the more that you can consider about why it is that you want what you want, then you can start figuring out all sorts of other things that can make it a really good deal and people feeling good about it.
Ladies and gentlemen, farmers, ranchers, and distinguished guests, thank you for listening to the Farm for Profit Podcast, where we discuss the latest ideas, methods, trends, and techniques available to help your farm achieve higher levels of farm profitability. The Farm for Profit Podcast is co-hosted by Tanner Winterhoff, the Iowa Bankerman, and David Whitaker, the Iowa Land Guy, where in tandem they will share their ideas and advice from industry experts. Thank you again for listening to the Farm for Profit Podcast. Remember, if you aren't farming for profit, you won't be farming for long. And now, here's Tanner and David.
And welcome back to the Farm for Profit Podcast. This is Tanner Winterhoff.
And this is David Whitaker.
Thank you so very much for tuning in today and listening to this podcast wherever you're at. Remember, we have a couple of different show types. So today, Dave, is a Farm for Profit episode. We're going to have a What's Working in Ag segment and then a general topic focusing on negotiation tips. But if you check into us next week or hit the next episode in our catalog, that's a Farm for Fun show. So a little bit more of a loose structure, kick back, a little bit laid back, try to be entertaining there as well. So thank you again for listening to us.
It's our after-hour spinoff. So, all right, Tanner, we want to thank everybody for suggesting any topics. We also want them to suggest more topics. If you want to do that, it's at farm4profit LLC at gmail.com. Check us out on our social media profiles as well, and we greatly appreciate anything you do to help grow our audience. Every week we have a listener review, Tanner, and this one's brought to you by Outback Wraps.
Yeah, welcome back, Outback Wraps. Great returning partner. They help you easily connect your equipment with their hydraulic hose markers. They are marked with simple identification to make this system foolproof. And now, their new snake collection is there for bundling and containing whatever is available, and they come in boxes of up to 80 feet in length. So, Dave, I don't know if you remember that, but the Outback Wraps are like 6 to 8 inches long. But people are become such a big fan of this that now they want to wrap a lot. Because it doesn't just identify, it also makes it a little bit more firm to hold on to, keep things together, bundled. But now you can get up to 80 feet in one box.
And we're going to offer them a 20% discount if you type in farm, the number 4, profit, farm, number 4, profit.
OutbackWraps.com. And our listener review this week is from I think they just pounded on the keyboard.
I think so.
I'm pretty sure that's all they did.
UHFDGRGDB__ something.
But guess what? It's a 5-star review, so thank you so much. Best podcast out there. Farm for Fun is equally fun and educational. You can always trust these guys for a good laugh and some light education. So thanks, Bud, for leaving us a review. How about that, Bud, instead of trying to spell that username back out again?
Talking about working, we like this section called What's Working in Ag, and today we have a special guest, Farm Rescue, and Farm Rescue, I think, was started up towards North Dakota. That's where I know it, Tanner, and who do we have today?
You bet. We have Dan Erdman, who is the program manager, and Jed Wall, who's listed as their treasurer, on the line with us today. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hey, thanks for having us, guys.
Thank you.
Why don't you let our listeners know a little bit more about yourself? We'll start with you, Dan, and then Jed. Tell us a little bit about what you got going on.
So, again, I'm Dan Erdman, serve as the program manager for Farm Rescue. Very honored to do so. A little about myself. I grew up in a farm family. I think like a lot of farm families, unfortunately, my dad couldn't make it work and went on to do other things. I got more into the marketing side of things and into broadcasting, and heard about this program called Farm Rescue years ago. And it's one of those that was always kind of close to my heart. Having been through it firsthand, it wasn't a result of injury, illness, or natural disaster that my dad couldn't make it work. It just was a financial thing. And again, program like Farm Rescue that comes in and helps in a time of injury, illness, or natural disaster, something that, again, was very close to my heart the first time I heard about it. And I've had the pleasure of being a part of this full-time team here for about 5 years.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us. What about you, Jed?
Jed Wall. I'm acting as the treasurer on the board of directors for Farm Rescue. Been around Farm Rescue for about 10, 12 years. Started with Farm Rescue as a volunteer, helping on a couple of different cases, and got to be involved with Bill and some of the other board members and volunteers, and was asked to join as a board member. This is my third term here. I really enjoyed helping on that aspect and that side of our operation. Spent my whole career working in the seed business, holding various roles from sales to management, and right now currently working in business development. Born and raised in Wapton, North Dakota. I was not raised on a farm. Our family farm ended with my dad. My grandfather passed away when my dad was 14, and my dad took over the farm at the age of 14 and farmed for about 6 years and decided farming wasn't for him. Went on to be a school teacher, and then later in life was a state representative. So farming's in my blood. I work on a little different angle these days. So
awesome. Well, thanks for joining us, guys. So when I think of farm rescue, I think of the red, white, and blue billboards that I see all the time. If you've never seen one, drive up to North Dakota, you'll see them. And the farm rescue is on the side. Now, you guys are more than just North Dakota, correct, Dan?
Absolutely. Yep. Again, North Dakota is where it all started back in 2006. But since then, we've added states and we've added services to our repertoire here. And we're up to, again, 7 states, North and South Dakota, Minnesota, Montana, Iowa, Nebraska, and then most recently Kansas last year.
So we have kind of brushed really, really high level over what this even is. So I want to read the mission statement from the website. It says, the mission of Farm Rescue is to help family farms and ranches bridge crises so that they have the opportunity to continue viable operations. They do this by providing planting, haying, harvesting, and livestock feeding assistance to farm and ranch families that have experienced major injuries, illnesses, or natural disasters. So they, so far, according to the website, have assisted over 700 farm and ranch families since 2005. Is that right?
Absolutely. And actually, just last week, we helped our 800th. So,
Holy congratulations.
Yeah. So, and that it truly takes a village when we're talking farm rescue. Everything we do is volunteer led as far as, the work actually being done in the fields. Again, it's the planting, haying, harvesting, livestock feeding assistance. It takes a lot of, financial support to make this happen as well. We're a 501c3 nonprofit organization. So a lot of donors, a lot of business sponsors who all believe in this mission, who all believe in, extending a helping hand to farm and ranch families in a time of need.
So, Dave, this is an interesting, a little bit different take on our What's Working in Ag segment, because we don't want you to have to use Farm Rescue. We know, though, however, just like it says in their mission, this might be something that you need in order to continue a financially viable operation. So this is what's worked for some farming families.
You bet. And I want to think that this is like the Travis Burkhardt Foundation. They have a little bit different story. How did you guys start?
We started, again, it was back around 2005 was when 2005 was the year we were actually founded. And it was, again, a North Dakota farm kid by the name of Bill Gross. Not a kid at the time when he started it, but again, Bill grew up in a farm family here in North Dakota. And again, like many, he couldn't make it work, and he went on to college and became a pilot. And he actually still flies for UPS Airlines. He flies all over the world, but very involved in everything we're doing, still serves as our president on the board of directors there with Jed Wall. But, it all started with a simple conversation with a co-pilot on a long trip over the ocean one day that, hey, what do you want to do when you retire? And Bill's answer was, want to buy a tractor and go around and help farm families in a time of need. And his co-pilot kind of challenged him, well, why wait until you retire? And that's kind of what got the ball rolling on everything. And like I said, it's grown a lot since then. That first year in 2006, it was just planting. It was just in North Dakota, and it was Bill and another volunteer, also named Bill, strangely enough, that went around and did most of the work that first year. And it's taken farm shows and some media coverage to get the word out about what we're doing. But we've grown again to 7 states. We've added the harvest assistance, haying assistance, and livestock feeding assistance. And we're up to almost 1,000 volunteers that come from 49 different states to do this work and serve as our boots on the ground.
Which state are you missing?
Delaware. I don't know why. We've talked about this for a couple of years already. I just can't get a volunteer signed up from Delaware.
All right, listeners from Delaware, you have a mission. All right, Dave, go ahead.
I was just going to tag back to what you were relaying there. And so this is our What's Working in Ag section. And normally we talk about something that can make you profitable. But this is kind of the reverse of this. If you aren't profitable, then this is still help to help you stay in the game.
Yeah, it's definitely not something that your, I'm going to call them customers, Dan, your customers don't expect to use or call on Farm Rescue. It's not something that is something that you look forward to, but if you are in a position to where you can't physically do it, or your illness, or just the way Mother Nature is acted, it's something that is going to potentially help your farm survive for another year.
Yeah, like we said, it's we think of ourselves as just a short-term solution. We're not going to be there to hold your hand over the next few years here for your operation, but all these things are so unexpected. Farming's hard enough as it is, but you throw in, again, an injury or an illness or a natural disaster that makes it that much harder to survive. We want to be there to provide that short-term solution and get you through that season to the next season, basically. And our track record speaks for itself. Like I said, we've helped 800 families now, and I think all 800 of those would say wonderful things about the help that they received from Farm Rescue. A couple of years ago, we had reached out and kind of conducted a survey of those that we've helped, and it was somewhere in the ballpark of 93% of the farmers that had received assistance through Farm Rescue were still in operation 3 years after we'd been there.
Oh, that's cool.
So I think that speaks volumes also to what we're doing, and that's exactly what we want to see. We just want to extend that livelihood and hopefully to the next generation.
That's great.
Dan, you were saying that you count on, it's a 501c3, so we count on volunteers, we count on partners to Farm Rescue program and donors. What is your biggest need? So you're helping farmers. I know you guys had drought up that direction. What's your biggest needs that you have kind of at this current state?
Absolutely. Like, I think most nonprofits will tell you it's always funding. There's always more to be done. There's always more families in need of support. And the more funding we have, the more families we can support. So again, it's always what it all boils down to is just, the financial support. We take a lot of pride as a small full-time staff to stretch every donation dollar that we get and every sponsorship dollar that we get to its limit to help as many families as we possibly can. So we appreciate anything and everything that our donors and sponsors are willing to give for this mission.
So if our listeners want to give back or help out with this program, donating financially is one of those. Are there other ways that people can get involved with Farm Rescue?
Absolutely. We rely very heavily on our volunteer family. We have a lot of them, but we're always looking for more. And you don't necessarily have to have a background in agriculture to come out and help us. We have a lot of returning volunteers year after year, our seasoned veterans, but we try to cycle in a lot of new folks just to get more involved with this and extend what we're trying to do for many years to come. And then a big part of what we do, because any farmer and rancher out there listening right now, they're very proud people. It's not easy to ask for help. And so we rely very heavily on referrals from friends and family members, spouses, just people in communities that know of a family that's going through a tough time. And, that's kind of our bread and butter is referrals from other people. And we can reach out to these folks and say, here's the deal. We want to come in. We want to help. Will you allow us to do this? Other people have taken notice. Again, it's not an easy thing to do, to admit that you maybe need a little help, but there's no shame in accepting that help just for a short term to get you through and on to the next season.
So, Tanner, when I fly on a plane, I always want to sit in the exit row because I'm willing to assist in the, not for the footroom. I'm willing to assist.
Right. Yeah. Uh-huh.
I'm always willing to assist in taking that door off. If we had farmers that were willing to assist you with doing the harvest, doing the hay crop, feeding the cattle, is there a sign up on your website if some of our listeners that are big time farmers might want to sign up as well to assist that way?
Absolutely. And again, a lot of what we do is through, sponsored equipment. John Deere, both at the corporate level and the local dealership level, has been an incredible supporter of ours since the beginning. So a lot of our equipment, especially in the fall season here, we have, a couple combines that are sponsored up to a certain number of hours. But over time here, with support and capital campaigns and grants, like any nonprofit, we've been able to purchase some of our own equipment as well. So we try our best to utilize that equipment where it's needed and get it to where it needs to go. But if there's someone out there that wants to get involved and help us out on the volunteer front, absolutely. Check out farmrescue.org. Everything you need to know about us is right there on the website, and you can sign up to be a volunteer and kind of let us know what your experience level is with all of these things that we do.
Perfect. Awesome. I think you did a great job of summarizing that up. Farmrescue.org, listeners. That was our What's Working in Ag segment. Thanks, Dan, for jumping in and sharing a lot of this information. Jed, thanks for your service. Board member position shouldn't go unnoticed, so thank you there for filling in and helping this really great cause. Guys, I know we're going to catch up with you again sometime down the road, but this was a great What's Working in Ag segment.
Thank you, guys.
Much appreciated.
They're minimizing risks on your farm, helping you improve your yields, and increasing your profit margins. In today's farming operations, the data is the key to achieving all of this, Dave.
It's no secret that data has been helping more and more farmers gain ground in their operation, and there's no better way to manage all of that data than through John Deere's Operations Center. As a leading farm management platform, John Deere is constantly and continuously fine-tuning the features in Operations Center to make it easier, faster for you to analyze all of that farm data.
Yeah, and within that Operations Center, you can collect and analyze all of your machine, field, and crop data year after year so you can make those data-driven decisions for your operation. You can set up field instructions for your machine operators, then push those instructions directly to that in-cab display straight from that Operations Center. Then your operators don't have to enter this information when they get to the field.
That is so cool. And with near real-time monitoring with the Operations Center, you can track the machine performance, the field work, and stay ahead of all the logistics to ensure the right work is being done at the right time. With all that yield data in Operations Center, you can analyze your total farm operations performance and make any changes for an even better next year.
And John Deere continues to make their Operations Centers your go-to place to gain ground in your operation. It's free to use. Just create an account at operationscenter.deere.com or download the mobile apps from the Apple app or Google Play stores. You can also see your local John Deere dealer for more information. Thank you to John Deere for being a proud partner of the Farm4Profit Podcast.
There you go. Well, that's great. What's working in ag section, Tanner. And now to our main topic. We are into negotiations. Everybody wants to know. We've had a lot of requests for this. Back to negotiations. Do you remember what podcast episode we did when we had negotiations before with the hostage negotiator with the FBI?
I want to say it was back to like 35 or 36.
It's one of my favorites, but we're going to revisit it. We got a new guest today who's very knowledgeable in this and where we're going to go with that. Tell me more about our guest.
Yeah, I'm excited. This has become a personal friend of mine, and I really look up to him. Vance Crowe. He is a communications consultant and has worked for corporations and international organizations around the world. He's spoken before more than 150,000 people, answering questions about some of the most sophisticated and controversial technologies in the modern age, Dave. Vance is a former director of millennial engagement for Monsanto. He previously worked as communications strategist for the World Bank Group, as well as in the U.S. Peace Corps volunteer stationed in Kenya as a communications coordinator there. Also part of the National Public Radio affiliate in Northern California. So Vance holds his degree in communications from Marquette University and a master's degree in cross-cultural negotiations from Seton Hall School of Diplomacy. And I don't think we could have found another more qualified guest to help you as the listeners figure out ways that we might be able to get some of these negotiations tipped in our favor. So welcome, Vance.
Hey, thanks for having me.
This is so much fun. I cannot wait to pick your brain because I've had customers and listeners emailing me saying, I need some advice. And the first thing it's always happening with is cash rent. So we'll get to that. But farmers are realizing that input costs are rising and we're going to have to do more work now than ever to keep those down. But why don't you tell a little bit more about yourself outside of the introduction that I gave?
So I am the middle child of 7 from a small town in central Illinois, and I think that's probably the most central part of my bio. You know, when you grow up in a large family, you have to figure out either how to be faster than everybody else, smarter, or better able to get your point across. And I was neither faster nor smarter than my siblings, so I had to figure out how to make my case and make other people want to listen to what I had to say. And I took that on into the world. And really, like, if you listen to the biography, which sounds like it was a well thought out plan, but really it was just me bouncing from one thing I was curious about to the next. And I eventually found myself having a lot of experience with a bunch of different groups of people where I had to figure out, how do I take ideas that I have or ways of thinking that I want to get across how do I understand where other people are coming from? And then how do I make the most of these kinds of situations? And I found myself accidentally becoming somebody that talks a lot about communications and negotiations.
Well, accidentally is great for us today because that's exactly what we're looking for. So first thing, Dave, I'll ask you first, then we'll go to Vance. Can anybody be good at negotiating?
From our previous episode, I'm going to say yes, anybody can be good. There are people that are extroverts and people that are introverts that definitely don't like to have those conflict conversations, though.
So, Vance, do you agree with Dave?
Oh, yeah. I think really the people that don't like conflict just have to leverage a different kind of skill set or a different way of looking at it. And so if you think, hey, am I going to be like a powerful, aggressive negotiator? No, there's only going to be a few people that are like that. But I'm not like that. I actually don't enjoy those types of negotiations. And so you just have to figure out what is the way that you communicate best and leverage those skills.
So what are some of these base skills that our listeners could either reflect on or maybe start building?
The very first one sounds like a cliche, but the most important thing in a negotiation is making it so that the other side feels understood. And you think about this, you think about like a disagreement with your spouse. Oftentimes, you have two people, they're arguing about something, and you notice like people raise their voice. It doesn't make any sense. Why are you raising your voice? And psychologists often say, well, the reason that people raise their voices is because they think my point is so clear that the reason you're not agreeing with me must be because you can't hear me. So I'm going to get louder. And you watch it ratchet it up. But if you want to slow down a disagreement really, really fast, all you have to do is say, okay, let me see if I can understand your point of view. And if you articulate what the other person's perspective was in as high fidelity as they believe that they're articulating it to you, you will watch this tension just melt away. And it's almost magical, right? The thing that I'm describing here, this concept of mirroring, it feels like when you start doing it, like they're going to know that I'm using this trick to try and defuse the thing. But what happens is most people go most of their lives never being heard. They feel like nobody listens to them. So even if you're in a really tense situation, if you can describe for somebody what you think they think their perspective is, you will watch tension go away and they will be so much more open to what it is that you have to say than you could ever think possible.
Tanner, I think that goes right with salesmanship as well. We've talked about it when we talk about seed sales or farmland sales or auctions. Oftentimes, one of my lead questions as a salesperson in the farmland world is, what are you looking for in an auction company? And then it's hard for me to just shut up and let them talk. And they'll tell you exactly what they're looking for. And most often you can mirror, just as he's talking, your services to what they're looking for. You probably had those services in your package anyway, but mirroring what they said makes them feel, I love that. I love everything about what you just said.
Well, and that's the beginning of your negotiations in a sales process. You are making sure that what they want is understood. So what else, Vance, would be a key first one or two pieces that our listeners could exercise?
I think the next thing is actually literally trying to understand what they're saying. Oftentimes you think about like, oh, I know where they're going with this. I know how they're trying to manipulate me. I know everything about what they're doing. And why do I know it? Because I can feel it, right? We do so much off of that feeling, like somebody's going to take something from us or somebody's going around you or they're trying to trick you. But if when you're listening to somebody and you're mirroring back for them and then they actually say, well, no, that's not what I meant. What I meant was, and they tell you things, being genuinely interested in why they think what they think is one of those things that also makes people way more open to you. And so I think the very first, not just step, but the first two steps are to be as curious and interested in what the other person is saying long before you try and get your perspective out. In fact, once you're giving your perspective, the entire nature of the negotiation is changing. So the very first step and then the next one is all about trying to make people not only feel like you understand them, but really going in and trying to understand them. So I often use the phrase, tell me more about that. I heard you say that you think I'm being unfair in this situation, or I heard you say this. instead of hitting back with your perspective, you just invite people to tell you more about it, and you will be astounded. That phrase, "tell me more," is one of those phrases that has really opened up the entire world to me. There's almost never a situation in which you will be harmed by asking someone to tell you more about something.
Vance, my word is just a little different. And Tanner, you know it. It's help me understand. I just say, help me understand where you're coming from, or help me understand more about what you're talking about. Same as you, just a couple different words.
No, I like that. And that's great. So I'm kind of grabbing from the first two pieces you shared, though, is that we need to be able to ask questions. So is there something that we could do to become better at asking questions, or how we could ask a better question?
You know, I think one of the ways that you get better at it is just doing it.
Okay.
You know, I have a podcast. I've done something like 240 episodes or something like that. And I go back and listen to the first 100 or so episodes, and I thought I was good at asking questions. I'm sure you guys can relate to this. And what you realize is there's different layers of asking questions, because most of the time somebody is talking and you're just spending as much of your energy being like, what am I going to say next? How, you know, you're barely listening at all to what they're saying. And then the second layer of listening is like, okay, how am I going to ask them a creative question kind of around what they're talking about? And then that inner layer is being so present that you don't really even have to think about what question you're asking. And the only advice I have for people is people will be completely forgiving of you having a gap in the conversation. If the gap is what they've just finished what they're saying, you're taking a pause and you're thinking about what they just said, and you ask them a question relevant to what they just said. And this pause is something that's really awkward in Western culture. It's particularly awkward for men, because the way that we learn to talk is in a circle of guys where one person is talking, and as soon as there's a gap of breath, we jump in. That's why people have uhs and ums and likes and you knows, is because they're trying to hold that floor so somebody doesn't interrupt them. But when you're in a negotiation and there's something valuable in between the two of you, it's worth it to just let there be some space, let there be contemplative time. And as you get better at asking questions, the more that you do this, the easier those questions will come.
I had written down while you were talking about that, trust yourself. Because it is. It's a natural instinct to participate in a conversation. And Dave and I and Corey have grown so much during this podcast to realize that you can't edit real life, but you can edit a podcast to cut out. It's more valuable to be present. We also had a gal that helped the bank out with some strategic planning, and she said that silence is her friend. She's become extremely comfortable with just sitting in silence because it allows the people that she's consulting time to think, and maybe they have another idea. So in this case with negotiations, if you pause, you may actually get more out of the opponent, if you want to call it that, the other person in the negotiation. While you're thinking, they may even divulge more information further to potentially provide you more value in that conversation.
I have a story with that, Tanner. I was not good, and I'm still not, at mastering the pause. Being an auctioneer, that happens. But with that being said, I remember the first land transaction. I'm sitting at the table, nervous as heck, want to book the deal no matter what, irregardless of what the fee is. I want the deal. And I'm meeting with an older gentleman and his wife, and he's processing it. And the processing word there is what I didn't give him time to do. I told him everything. I talked through it, and then I expected him to give me a yes immediately or a no immediately. So my senior partner that was with me paused, and he's just got a smile on his face, and he's sitting there, and I'm looking at him, and I'm looking at the client thinking, something's wrong. Somebody's got to talk. We got to talk. We're going to lose the deal. Lower the commission. Let's go. He's backing out. What's the deal? And all these things run through my head. And then finally, we just waited long enough. I didn't say anything. I let my senior partner do it. And he's just over there smiling. And I'm looking at him like, what are you doing? And then all of a sudden the guy says, sounds like a good deal. And we booked the deal at the rate we were at. We didn't have to concede on commission, nothing. And a big lesson was learned. That people need to process whatever you said. So I'm with you, Vance, on that. The pause is huge.
And there's something to be said about, doing all this stuff over Zoom and these kind of digital conversations. You start to feel like any airspace is bad. Whereas when you're sitting at a coffee shop or when you're casually with people, pauses are actually a lot more natural than we remember in our minds. And so as people are getting away from the COVID world and they're re-entering, my business partner, for example, I keep having to tell him after we're done with meetings, like, man, we do not need to sell this horse twice. Once the conversation is over, or once we've taken a break, just have that long pause, like you were saying. But it's something has really, I think, created that tension, is that in this digital world, we want things so much faster than we even did before. So I think it was already tough, particularly for younger people when you're just getting into it, but then it's a lot harder now.
Vance, do you think that there is, you kind of just mentioned it, sell the horse twice. I've sat with different salesmen. We're talking about negotiations, so sales comes into this quite a bit, that oversell it. They've already pre-planned for what they were going to say. They have all the tools in the toolbox. They go in there. And sometimes that, whether we're negotiating cash rents or negotiating a farm for sale or whatever you might be talking with somebody about, sometimes they're like, okay, sounds good. And they really don't care. They just want you to solve the problem. And you did. But yet the brain, you had this whole presentation, already planned out, and you keep sales pitching it and sales pitching it and sales pitching it. And they're like, yeah, I already told you we're good. Let's go. And you just keep selling. Do you think that's a flaw that a lot of people have, or is it just me?
Everybody has it. My father did a really good job when I was a kid. He used to wear these trifocals, and we used to make a joke that you could tell how much trouble you were in by how deeply into your soul my dad was looking with his trifocals. You just keep bending his head back and back.
Yep.
But he would let you talk yourself not just into being grounded, but into being grounded for a month and then a month and a half and maybe 2 months, because he would just sit there silently. And silence in so much of our culture signifies disagreement, right? We really genuinely believe if this person isn't nodding their head yes and they're not saying something positive, then I can't handle that. And actually, this reminds me, when I was in my very first communications class in college, the professor asked everybody in class, he was trying to demonstrate the power of communications. He said, how many people in this room are dating their high school sweetheart? And a whole bunch of hands went up, right? And then he said, okay, well, 98% of you, by the time Christmas break rolls around, will no longer be dating that person. And he said, and if any of you are on the receiving end of that breakup, if you're the one that gets broken up with, and let's say you were cheated on, the way that you can cause the most damage is not to accept that you were cheated on, and it's not to yell and scream that the other person did something horrible to you. It's to say nothing at all. Just absolutely cut off all communications and stop, and you will burn into this person's memory for the rest of their lives. And, you kind of sit there and think, one, that's a little bit of a sadistic way to make people think about communications. But then he said, the human mind can handle negative feedback. It can definitely handle positive feedback, but the one thing it can't do is handle no feedback at all. And that's where you start realizing, the reason we want somebody to say something is because there's this tension, and the only way it's going to be relieved is if they reject us or accept us. And so getting comfortable with that area where there's silence or no response, or you don't know where they're going, is really about self-confidence and self-mastery, but it opens up the door for you to be able to get the other person to loosen up if you don't have to have an answer right on the spot.
That just reminded me, there's a country song out right now that says breaking up was easier in the 90s. And it's kind of talking about how in the 90s, you might have been able to convince yourself that you missed their phone call on the house phone, or they came by your house and you weren't around. But now silence kills you, because they could text you, they could snap you, they could send you a DM on Twitter, they could do all of this, and the silence can be deadly.
If they opened your message,
that's
too.
True.
Like, that dirty dog already read it, and they still haven't responded.
So I want to keep our listeners in this. And before we get to the end of this show, Vance, we're going to hit some situations. And we're going to talk about cash rent, we're going to talk about fertilizer or chemical supplier, we're going to talk about family. So we're going to try and do some situational stuff at the end. But I want to cover a couple more things before we get to that. Now, we talked a little bit about confidence when you just mentioned that it could really tear down the person's confidence with silence. But do we have to start, or do we have to feel like we have a leg up before a negotiation begins? Is that a necessary thing, is to feel like we have the upper hand?
I don't think so. One of the things that happens after you start listening to the other person and you start understanding where they're coming from is you inevitably have to put forward your position. And I do some position-based negotiating. So when you're talking about how much is something going to cost, can I rent this land, yes or no, right? Those are positions. I'm an interest-based negotiator. So my work is oftentimes around conflict. Two groups of people can't get along. There's not necessarily a yes or no. It's more of like a feeling. Are we getting along? And part of that is, how do you as an individual feel? So sometimes when you're describing, hey, this is where I'm coming from, and you see that person that's across from you totally rejecting it. They don't like what you have to say. They're saying, no, you're wrong, or that's incorrect, or your history isn't accurate. What I try and do is say, before we go into your response to this, what did you hear me say? What do you think my perspective is? And you're actually putting them in the position of mirroring you, so that way you can hear from their perspective what they think is going on in your mind. What do they think? And oftentimes they're the polarity they put into that language. Like, how do they sound? Are they mocking what you're saying? Are they diminishing it? Or are they being like, well, you think this and this and this and this. And sometimes you're like, actually, yeah, you really do understand my point. So now, because I know you understand my point of view, I'm going to also be way more interested in what you have to say. And maybe you do have a point that I haven't considered. So making sure that they feel understood and that you're in a position where you can help make sure that you are understood by them, I think is the basis. Instead of that kind of alpha dog, hey, I got to be in charge, or I got to be the one pulling all the levers. This sort of balance makes it much more comfortable and makes people want to arrive at conclusions.
So what you're talking about is message sent, message received, communication. We talk about that all the time. So you're having them mirror the opposite way to make sure that they receive the message correctly.
Absolutely. And I mean, this works really well. You think like, I don't want to ask that person, what have they heard me say? But I was having a disagreement with a neighbor about their dogs barking and doing all this crazy stuff. And when I came up to tell them my point of view, we really started having conflict. And I just said, hey, hold up, just one second. What do you think I'm concerned about? And when they were able to put it out, you could actually watch that they had to think about, how can I describe his way of thinking so that he'll agree that I understand? And that in and of itself slowed them down and made them think more methodically. And you watch people, a lot of times when we're in conflict, our brain is being short-circuited. We aren't thinking about things logically. We're trying to pop back the other person. We're trying to win. And helping people slow down and think more rationally allows the whole discussion to go better.
That just sparked a memory. So my wife helps out at church running the media production, and one of the guys that's in the booth with her on a frequent basis really likes body language and has made that one of his either hobbies or an expertise of his. And you know, when they do the service 4 or 5 times a weekend, you know when parts of the sermon are coming, and you could watch some of the congregation cross their arms or shift in their chair. When it gets to a tough part or something that they don't agree with or don't want to hear. So that body language, I think, can go a long ways in the mirroring, like you were saying, tone of voice, body language, how they're articulating. You could probably learn a lot that almost gives you a leg up in the conversation. But one of the things that I'm curious about is I was always taught that the first person to show their cards loses. Is that true?
I don't think so. I mean, I think like there are certain circumstances where you'll have, car dealers and, on the warranty, and you start figuring that out. But in my experience, really finding a situation in which you make it clear that if you give me what I need, then I can give you what you need, and we're going to find the most balanced perspective possible. We're going to find the best outcome is almost always the way out of a negative negotiation. If you're doing power moves, you can only do that, like the who's going to show their cards first and who's going to win and lose. That's in a zero-sum game, because if somebody walks away and feels like they lost because they showed their cards first, well, then the next time you negotiate, it's not going to be good. And really, we want to be in not finite games, not these one-off situations. We want to be in relationships with people where we're coming back again and again and again to negotiate. That's why the guy that's been in the game for so long, the game is so much easier for him. And it's because he's built up a bunch of relationships where people trust him in negotiations to represent both sides. And you may win in one hand about that, thinking about it in terms of who shows their cards first. But over the long term, it doesn't help you.
That reminded me of the first conversation we had around negotiation. And that sounds like what was coined as smart trade-offs in a conversation. And not necessarily a compromise, but knowing what is valuable to you and what is valuable to the other side. And then making sure that the other party leaves feeling like they won. Because I agree, if they feel like they lost, why would they ever want to do business with you again? I don't want to go and play that team that always pounds us.
Yep.
I would rather go play one to where at least I felt like we had a good game.
So every time I'm trying to negotiate a farm sale, let's go to cars. Let's negotiate the sale of a car. The buyers will always come. They will find something to pick out about it. Oh, well, the tires are wore down, and geez, there's a scratch on the back, and always the sellers. Oh, but it's only got 30,000 miles, and it's got the sunroof and the navigation. Buyers will always bring out the negatives. Sellers will always bring out the positives. So what I try to help them understand, Tanner, is that, hey, we know who wants to sell the car. You do, right? So lay out that expectation. We know who wants to buy the car. You do, right?
That's why I'm here.
The only thing we haven't figured out is what is the means to an end of the negotiable compromise between price so that you're happy and you're happy. Vance is talking about the same thing. Lay out your expectations. I would like this, and this is what I think you can do to make that happen. And I know you want this, and I know that would accomplish what you want. That's when we come to, so communication sells anything, and communication helps with the negotiation.
Vance, I know you read quite a bit. I'm sure you've read the book Never Split the Difference.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So we've encouraged our listeners in the past to read that book. What are your thoughts on that strategy?
So in some ways, I'm really aligned with his way of thinking about compromise to an interest-based negotiator is failure, right? It's like we were taught in this Western culture that, hey, if you can't come to resolution, let's say you and I both have an orange, Tanner, and there's an orange sitting on the table, and you want the orange and I want the orange. Well, right now, in the position-based argument, either you can get the orange and I can get nothing, I can get the orange and you can get nothing, or the compromise, let's just split that orange in half, and then we both take half. Now, to the interest-based negotiator, just like in that book, he views that as a failure because maybe I didn't want half the orange, I wanted all the orange.
Uh-huh.
But the question comes down to, why do you want the orange, right? So if you're thirsty, then you want the juice, and if I'm making essential oils, then I want the peel. And if we had figured out what we want, then we can both maybe get everything that we wanted in that situation. And a lot of times it doesn't work out that way, right? Like when you were describing price, there's a finite line on there. However, most of the time people think, well, this is all we're disagreeing over. But in reality, there's more to it, right? Sometimes when somebody's buying a car, they want their spouse to feel like they got to participate in it. They want the transaction not to be complicated. They have lots of time, but very little money. So they could make it a more complicated transaction if it'll save them on cash. And so when you come down to just a single point where it's price, then that's a position. You can only split that thing in half. That's as close as you can get.
Right.
But the more that you can consider about why it is that you want what you want, then you can start figuring out all sorts of other things that can make it a really good deal and people feeling good about it.
I like that.
The feeling understood. So I just wrote down on my paper, finding the why. Finding the why is going to be my coined phrase here. And it's painful for me, Vance, because I was thinking of arguing with my wife, and I thought, I don't want to know why. I just want you to come to my side and listen to what I'm saying. I don't need you to understand how I feel. Just listen to me because I said so. So I'm guessing some of our listeners might feel that way too, Tanner.
Well, so the other day I was in a disagreement with my wife over, we're going to have some architecture work done, right? And so she wants she's an aerospace engineer, so she just wants the engineer type people, and I was advocating for the artists, right? And I was like, I want the artist that's going to have all this creativity and throw in all these different designs, and she was like, I want the person that's going to answer my email, and they're going to answer the questions, and it's going to be laid out in a spreadsheet. And so I was asking her, why do you want this? This makes no sense to me. We're trying to do architecture, which is art, right? And she said, well, I'm going to be the one handling most of the transactions. I'm going to be the one coordinating the emails back and forth with them, and I'm going to be da-da-da-da-da. And I was like, I didn't know that. You're going to handle all the logistics of this. So if we choose the one where you're happy to handle the logistics, then the 8 or 9 month process that we're going into with this architect, you're going to be less mad that we didn't choose the one that you wanted, right? Like, and actually, when I start thinking about what are my interests in this architecture situation, it's, I don't want to spend all of my time on this. I don't want to have there to be tension between me and my wife. So when I understood her why, suddenly, like, it made it a lot clearer to me that there was way more value in the engineer style architect than there was necessarily in the artist.
That's a really good example. Let's do that. Let's roll into some examples or some situations here before we close out with some more questions. So let's think about that on the family side first, since we're on that topic. One of the things that our listeners run into on a frequent basis is that work-life balance. Every farmer, every ag business salesperson will fight that, and that's going to be defined differently for every single person. So we're not going to attack that. But how about a conversation with a spouse to get you out of the house or to go do something that you want to do without making them upset? What are some good ideas on how we could approach trying to make that a smooth conversation?
So let me see if I understand it. You're saying, let's say a wife in this example, that she's saying, look, you work all the time and now you want to go hang out with your buddies.
Yep.
And I don't want this, like this, you're gone all the time already, right?
Yep.
And this is the conflict?
Correct.
I mean, in that situation, you really want to like come down to, what do we think about the way we spend our time and who is responsible for what? And what does it feel like to be left with responsibilities? So you really want to know, is the reason that your wife bucking the idea that you're having free time, is it because she doesn't think your friends are a good use of your time? Are you, more tired when you're supposed to be doing things? Does this cost her in other ways? Trying to figure out why that is, because I think most spouses want their, not most, I can say a good relationship means that you have both a good relationship inside the home and friends that are outside the home. And I think a lot of times that tension there is just misunderstood, right? The husband doesn't understand why it is that the wife feels like it's more than just you going to visit your friends. It's going to be all these other things. And they also don't see the value in it for them. Why would they want you to go spend time with your friends? What do they get out of that arrangement? Is it that you're going to be willingly taking on more responsibilities in some other area? Does it make you more pleasant to be around? There's all kinds of weirdness here, and this is kind of a vague example to try and divine, but does this make sense?
It does, and I think expectations come into it a lot. Is, yep, I'm going today, I will be around, or the end of harvest is near, or whichever it is. We keep coming back to communication. It's just the art of making sure that it's clear what you're wanting and what you're able to get out of it. But let's get back to the business side of farming, and kind of the reason I asked do you have to feel like you have the upper hand question goes right into this scenario. Every farmer struggles with gaining more farm land to farm, building those relationships with landlords. It always seems like the landlords or the farm manager that's managing that farm have the upper hand because they know there are 10 other farmers that they could call tomorrow and get them to come and pay cash rent or take care of this farm. So say we're going to approach our landlord who terminated our lease this fall because he saw prices going up, and they're going to probably ask for higher cash rent. How could we effectively start that conversation and get it quickly in our favor?
Well, I think that the first thing is the market's going to determine the price to some extent, right? If there's a huge discrepancy, then you have to understand that this person would be derelict to their family or to their overall responsibility. So it's really good to understand, hey, these aren't just people twirling their mustaches. They have a market reality. But then inside of that, you want to find out, what is it that they care about regarding this land? If they're a total absentee landlord, and they're, off in the city and all they want is that cash check to be as high as it can be, well, then that's one thing. But they may be somebody that has like a real connection with that land, and they want to make sure that the wildlife on there is well taken care of, or that soil quality continues to go up. So finding out what it is that they believe is part and parcel with their being a caretaker of that land allows you to present your argument or your reasoning for why you should stay on that land in a more nuanced way. And I'll give you an example. When I bought the house that I'm currently in, the man that had lived here for 60 years, and he was the only homeowner here that ever had the house. They were going to sell it for the price of the land because they thought somebody was going to come in, knock the house down, and build a new house up. Well, one of the things that I had read about in the newspaper before we came to negotiate on the price was that he was an avid birder. And so we actually came in and said, we would like the house. We're not going to knock it down. And what we'd like to do is know, what types of birds did he cultivate here? What types of trees did he have on here that he really spent a lot of time on, that we could make sure we keep up with that? And the children heard this and they said, wow, this is what we want. We want our dad's legacy. He spent 40 years doing this and we don't feel good about gouging over price. We want somebody that's going to caretake for the trees and the wildlife that's here. And we got a house. Could have easily gone out of our price range. In fact, in a matter of minutes, had we not had that discussion with them. And so you just never know, but you have to open up those discussions. You have to know what people care about in order to offer them something more than money.
I think if I can tack onto that a little bit, when he's talking about knowing the why, finding out the why, what was important, why they wanted to sell it and who they wanted to sell it to. When you're saying they canceled your cash lease, well, you have to find out the why. Why did that lease cancel? And what is important to you that maybe I wasn't doing that you'd like done? Why did that lease cancel? It's the same thought process I have with my kids. Not them I don't like, it's the action I don't like. And so I try to explain it. It's not them, it's the action. Let's take corrective action here. So I'm guessing if that lease was canceled, Tanner, that they probably saw more dollar signs, or they probably didn't think we were doing a good enough job with the farm stewardship or something. I think if you open that conversation with the help me understand or a finding the why question.
That's a good point. It's the doing the research, the homework to make sure that you're prepared. Because I think it's probably pretty obvious that if you aren't prepared for a negotiation, you're probably not going to have the upper hand unless you've got years of experience in the art of negotiating. And
I'm going to say, going in that mentality, you're going in with a question. You're not going in with an assumption. The assumption is probably what most farmers do. Well, they cancel my lease, they want more money. All right, we're going to go in there, and I'm already on the defensive of, nope, it's not worth more money because of blah, 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 blah. I think the assumptions make people,
I thought you were going to go the route of coming in with demands, because I could see that being another potential negative based upon the parties that you're working with. If you're demanding, saying, no, I've paid this high for so long, it's going to stay the same. What do you think, Vance?
So I was going to reference my favorite book, and actually I think I went to 2 years of negotiation school, and it really came down to this one book called Getting to Yes. And that book is the Bible as far as international conflict negotiators are concerned. And one of the core things about that book is it says you need to have a Batna, a best alternative to a negotiated agreement. And there's something that cash rent does. Is it gives you an alternative to whatever their price is, right? If they are going to raise the price on you, once you know what that rent price is, then if there's a certain amount that you can pay, you just can't go over that limit, and you'll just take that money and rent some other ground. But you have to consider, if that ground is further away, well, would you be willing to pay more in order to not have to drive equipment a few miles over the county roads? Would you be willing to pay more if you were only writing a check at certain times of the year? So you really want to think about all of the things that go into your Batna, your kind of final line. Then you want to explore as many whys as you can, because sometimes the why, or the things that you can provide, can answer that other person's needs, their interests, way, way better than just adding more money into their pocket. And it really comes down to exactly your point, Tanner. It's the research, it's the thinking about things that give you the opportunity to find solution, even when things seem very bleak.
Oh, I like that nugget so much. We found out what the dollar amount is, but can we do something else? Does it have to be paid half in March, half in September? Can it be paid in December after I have a chance to sell grain? Coming up with, if you officially got to what the dollar is, now what are some other things that could be tipped in my favor if the dollar is what they were searching for?
The acronym is BATNA.
Yeah, the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. And that's where like, hey, if it goes above this amount for cash rent, it's a non-starter. I can take that cash and go somewhere else. But you want to factor in all of these ideas. And like really the idea of being creative, the way that Tanner was talking about, I one time was negotiating at a job where they were, in my opinion, way underpaying me. So I came in and was like, hey, I think it was like a 40% raise. It was something absurd, but I was in my mid-20s and I didn't know any better. And the boss like sent me away and was like, hey, we can't pay that, but why don't you go think about what we can do for you and come back? And so I went away for the weekend and I came back and I was not creative. I was like, I really need this money because if I don't get this money, then I'm going to leave and go to grad school. And so she starts asking me questions when we sit back down. She says, okay, did you come up with a new number or what we can negotiate on? And I said, no, I need this much money. And she said, okay, well, if you don't get this money, what are you going to do instead? And I was like, well, I think I'll leave for grad school. I'll just quit and go to, and she was like, oh, I didn't know you wanted to go to grad school. Well, is there anything we could do to help make you better ready for grad school? You know, are you applying this fall? And I was like, no, it'll be next year. And she said, okay, so we have a year. Is there a way that we could change your job responsibilities? By the way, our company has a bunch of frequent flyer miles. Have you thought about how you're going to go visit these schools? Maybe we could use some of these frequent flyer miles and help you go out and visit these different schools so you don't have to pay them out of your cash. And when you start seeing these different things that she could do, I came way down on my salary. I think I probably got 5% of what I asked for, but I ended up getting opportunities that led to me getting a graduate assistantship. I got to go visit multiple schools. I got to change the nature of my work. And so she had very few people that she could hire opportunities. It was just a very sparsely populated area. So she wanted to work with me. She didn't have cash, but she found things that I wanted that even I couldn't name. And that creativity allowed us to find solutions. So when you talk about maybe I could pay it in different time slots throughout the year, or maybe there's other options we can do, the most creative almost always wins in a negotiation.
She sounds smart, Dave.
Well, I was going to say, that's you, Tanner. That's how we met. So Tanner was the creative banker. I'm like, how can I finance this? Because the normal banker probably wouldn't let me. Hey, well, if we move this or restructure that, or maybe if you were thinking about, et cetera, and then all of a sudden it works.
Nice. So last situation that I want to attack, and I hope you have a little insight to help us with this. It's the input supplier. If it's a co-op or a retailer, whichever it is, it feels like in the ag sector that there are set prices. It's just going to be this much per ton for nitrogen. It's just going to be this much per bag for seed, or this is what the unit is going to cost when I'm buying these. What are maybe a tip or a technique that we can use for something to where we feel like that price is already set and we don't have much power?
I mean, I think just asking the person that's doing the selling, like, what is it that makes you successful in your job, right? Is it volume? Is it margin? Is it the number of clients? Are there things that I can do that can help you that is worth more to you than just selling me at the rate that you're at, right? It could be something as simple as you need some introductions to new people. You're young in your career and you want some chances to get on other people's farms. I can make those introductions and have it be warm. It could be something like, what I need is a certain number of sales this year. And so maybe it's that they parcel out the number of times they visit your farm, or there's all different kinds of things. But what you really want to know, if you're negotiating over something that seems deeply set, they don't have any choice, then what is it that you can do to help them? Because if there's nothing you can do to help them, then why wouldn't you just buy it online, right? The reason that there's a salesperson there is because the company knows there's some wiggle room here. There's some dealing that needs to be done. Otherwise, it would just be an automated situation.
I felt like that was an aha moment to the podcast, because if you can develop that relationship with the salesperson who's more than likely driven by some type of an incentive, you figure out what the incentive is. Because if you can help make them look good, feel good, or get rewarded, they're more than likely going to help you out on your side of it.
Well, before Vance was talking, I immediately thought, well, you could buy in volume. You could maybe structure it with multiple year contracts. I was thinking of other ways to negotiate around it, and then he hit the nail on the head there with exactly asking them what they want. I was just thinking of suggesting other ways. Rather than suggest other ways, just ask. And I think it goes back to communication. Yeah. Message sent, message received. And what I am hearing today is a whole lot of listening. When I think of negotiations, I think of talking. And I'm going to revert that to, I think negotiations, Vance's way is a whole lot of listening and then reacting to what you're hearing.
It sounds like you might already have our challenge bottled up, so I'll let you do that.
Yes.
So Vance, before we wrap up, is there anything else that you're just itching to get out that you think could be beneficial to our listeners?
You will be shocked what people will tell you when you ask them genuine questions. Like when you ask somebody like, hey, how are you judged on this job? You might think like, they don't want to tell me that, but you'd be surprised. These people are spending their days doing something hard. They're opening up the truck door and they're asking for sales, and they're really working to try and provide for their own family, for their own operation, for their own things. And most of the time, people treat them transactionally. And just beginning the conversation about like, hey, how are you judged on this job? Or how are you doing? Will open up things, and you'd be surprised. You would think like, maybe they'll give me a deal because they're being nice to me. But I think it's deeper than that. I think deals come to mind when people trust another person, and things they couldn't have thought of if you guys had been in an adversarial or a transactional relationship come up because they're like, oh, hey, I want to help my buddy Tanner out here, and I let me see what I can think of, or hey, let me try and come up with a creative solution, or go to my boss with something I wouldn't have thought of. And so genuinely, that being curious and being interested in other people pays off over and over and over again, to the extent that's far beyond what you could ever calculate.
That was good. I'm excited. So I just went back and looked, Dave. The first episode we did on negotiating is episode 31, and that was with Miles Schraner. I feel like we covered a whole lot of different approaches today.
Completely different today than we did last time.
Which I'm so glad that the listeners suggested over and over again that we do another one like this. So after you listen today, go back to 31, because there's even more in that. And it just proves that there's so much knowledge around the art and skill of negotiating than what the eye would believe. But before I summarize, Vance, if people have a question or they want to interact with you, how can they get a hold of you or find you?
My email is really easy. It's just vance@vancecrowe.com. I'm also really easy to find on Twitter, just Vance Crowe. My name is so different that I kind of use it for everything. And then I have a podcast. So the Vance Crowe podcast is where people can hear about these ideas being put into practice.
That's great. And we thank you so much for joining us. I've been waiting to get you on. Glad that this topic kind of went right up your alley, and I have a feeling we're going to have you back. But listeners, today we were talking about negotiations. We know that this is a tough time of year when we're going to go into a higher input, higher cost season, and we want to maximize the value that we can retain for ourselves on our farm that we can. So start off by helping the person or company that you're negotiating with feel like they are understood. But then don't be afraid to ask them to clarify what they think your opinion is or your approach is. So that way it is very clear from both sides. Let them know what you think they think and ask that question and respond. Tell me more about that is another question that we can ask to maybe dig a little bit deeper if it's not clear or we need some more information on getting that. And then ultimately, give yourself a little bit of a pass, trust in yourself to not feel like you need to jump right on a response. Give yourself time to think. Give them time to think. Trust that you can be fully immersed into this conversation to be the most effective. Silence is okay. Work on building that relationship so you can work with this company or these parties for a longer time. I'm sure there is a time and place for a no-loss negotiation where you're not afraid to walk away and never deal with them again. But the best practice is to make sure that both parties feel like they walk away winning or feel good about that. Do your research and be prepared. Maybe go out there and get the Getting to Yes book as a winter reading or something along those lines. And then be thinking about Batna. And Vance, for the listeners again, what does Batna stand for?
It's the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. It's your walk-away point.
So that way, if you do get stuck on a price, you know what other things can benefit your farm or your position in this. So that way you walk away getting the maximum value that you can in return for that price that you pay. How do you think I did, Dave?
I think you took everything I could have suggested is what you did. I was going to give some ideas for, a challenge. We normally give a challenge, Vance, but before we do that, we always ask our guest, what is the one commonality trait that the most successful people that you've ever met, it doesn't have to be just agriculture, have in common? So while you think about what is the attribute or trait that most of the most successful people have in common, Tanner, while he's thinking about that, originally I was going to challenge with the Batna, finding the best alternative towards a negotiated agreement. That's what I would challenge everybody to do, because it's the devil's in the details, and oftentimes it's not just the one sticking point. So to do that, I guess my challenge would be listen, find the why. Find the why is what I'm going to say. And you can't find it unless you listen. And you have to truly listen, not just like I listen to my wife listen. I mean, like listen is what I'm saying. So Vance, we're going to go back to you with a question. What do the most successful people all have in common?
I think every successful person I know has been willing to be mentored by somebody that they admire. I think they put themselves in a position to ask questions of somebody that they're a little intimidated by, or they find themselves being drawn to, and then they take that advice and they actually try out things that make them uncomfortable. I think everybody I know that has done something important in this world was mentored by somebody else.
We've never had that answer.
That was so good.
That's awesome.
Listeners, don't forget about BW Fusion. They've got that fall incentive for signing up to purchase 500 acres of Meltdown and the 401 microbial team to get you that free field in 365. Also remember that they combine their best-in-class products along with the 365 soil and tissue program to provide growers the tools necessary to address the limiting factors in your soil in real time. So go out there, bwfusion.com, and get yourself some great biologicals booked before the end of the year, because it's only good for the fourth quarter 2021. Listeners, also, I hope you reach out to Vance and tell him how greatly you appreciate him, because we can't tell him enough. Thank you again, Vance, for joining us. Listeners, remember to like, rate, review, and share this podcast. Don't hesitate to leave us your suggestions, because just like you, someone else suggested this topic, and I'm glad that you did. So thanks again, listeners, and until next time, we'll see you then.
Remember, if you aren't farming for profit, you won't be farming for long.